We had a look at feature modules. Now let's dive into shared modules. Now what's a shared module? In this hypothetical app here, we got two feature modules. And of course, we would also have an app module, but it's not important for the shared module here. So we got two feature modules, products and sales. And as you can see, these two modules only differ in one component. The products module has the products component here on the left, and the sales module on the bottom right has a sales component. All the other components and directives they use are essentially the same. Now you can put such shared features, shared components, directives, and other modules even into a shared module, which you then import into both other modules. This again is a great step to avoid code duplication and have leaner modules. Now let's see this in practice in our application. In our application, we have no real shared features across our feature modules. If we have a look at the shopping list module and the recipes module, the only thing they have in common is the anti-common module, which unlocks ngIf. Now we could put this into a separate shared module, and we will actually, but this alone would not be worth it because then we just import our shared module, which exports the common module, instead of just importing the common module, so we wouldn't win much by that. But in theory in this application, we have more shared content. We have the alert, the loading spinner, and the placeholder, and the drop-down directive. The data storage service not, because services are special, as you will learn soon. So therefore, here in the shared folder, I'll create a shared.module.typescript file. And you can have multiple shared modules, and therefore they don't have to be named shared.module. If you only have one, it makes sense. Otherwise, you should give them a name that kind of summarizes which features you're grouping in there. Now here I'll name it just shared module and export a class shared module therefore. And just as before, this is a regular Angular module, and it therefore will receive the @ng module decorator like this. Now the idea here is that you still now declare and import anything into this module that might be used by other modules, but since every module works standalone, to then also make these things available in other modules, you will also export all these things which you're importing. So therefore here, for example, we add a declaration to declare our alert component, to declare our loading spinner component, and make sure you also add the import paths at the top, to declare our placeholder directive and our drop-down directive, let's say. And again, make sure to add all these imports. And this would be it. And let's now also say we also want to share some services, like the common module, not services, excuse me, I mean modules, like the common module, which we import from @AngularCommon. So I add this import here too. And then, since we don't want to use these features in the shared module, but import the shared module into other modules, we can export this here. And we export the alert component, the loading spinner component, the placeholder directive, the drop-down directive, and also the common module. And now the idea is that wherever we import the shared module, we have access to all these features which we initialize here. So in other modules, where we want to use one or all of these features, we don't have to add them to their modules. We just import the shared module and we got access because we're exporting all these stuff. If we wouldn't export it, we would not have access. So let's now use the shared module. Let's go to our shopping list module. And there we can at least now replace the common module, although that alone would not be worth it, but to demonstrate it. And we replace that with the shared module. Now, as I mentioned, and that's really important, it's not worth it here because the only thing we really need from the shared module in the shopping list module is the common module. And therefore, we replaced one module import with another. But if we would use the alert component here, or the placeholder directive, or the drop-down directive, then we would gain much more from that, because now we don't have to add all of that to declarations here. We just bring in the shared module, and we got access to all the things declared in the shared module and exported there. So in the recipes component, and recipes module, excuse me, we can do the same. We got the common module. Now we can remove that here, and instead simply bring in that shared module. Again, here not super useful, but to practice this. Of course, we can now remove the common module import here and just import the shared module. Now with that, if we try to save that, we'll face an issue though. As the app reloads, we get an error that the dropdown directive is part of the declaration of two modules. And that is now another super important concept you gotta understand about modules. You can only define or declare components, directives, and pipes once. You can't do that multiple times. You can import a module into multiple imports. So it is fine if we import the router module here in the recipes module and also in the shopping list module. Imports are okay. But declarations are not. If you declare the shopping list component here in the shopping list module, you must not declare it anywhere else. Even if you need it in another module, you must not declare it there. The solution then instead is to export it here and import that module into another module. And that's exactly what we're doing with the shared module. Here we are declaring and exporting stuff. So anywhere where we use one of these features, we now have to bring in the shared module, because double declarations, as we currently have them here in the app module, where I again declare the drop-down directive and so on, are not allowed. So instead here, we now have to remove the drop-down directive, the loading spinner component, and the placeholder directive and the alert component. We have to remove all of that here. And therefore, we also should remove these import statements here at the top, like this. All of that has to go. Also remove the alert component here. And now cut entry components and add this to the shared module. Now the app module is cleaned up. And now we just have to make sure that we import the shared module here, because we still need access to certain features. We need access to the drop-down directive because we are using it in the header component, which is part of the app module. So now we need to import the shared module here into the app module, because that now declares features like the drop-down directive. And with that, if we save that, now this is looking better. Now if we reload and so on, this seems to work. Now if I test my alert component again, this also works again, because this is also declared in the shared module. There we also have our entry component, which is still required. And since I export the alert component in the shared module, and I'm importing the shared module into the app module, which at the moment is the place where we define our off component, which in turn is the component that uses the alert component, that all works. But only because we respect the rule of only declaring things once and then using export and imports to share them. Multiple declarations of the same thing are not allowed. Now that we had a look at feature modules and shared modules, let's have a look at the third important module type you can work with, and that would be the core module. And of course, let me highlight that all these modules are created in the same way with ng module. Just the things we put in there and how we use them differs, and that is what I mean with different module types. So what's the core module? The core module is basically there to make the app module a bit leaner. Let's say in the app module, we have the app component, and here we are providing two services. Well, then we can use a core module to move these services out of the app module into the core module, which then in turn is added back to the app module. The alternative to that would of course be to use provided in add injectable on the services, which means we don't have to add them to providers at all. But if you do add it to providers in the app module, well, then using a core module can be an idea to again keep your app module leaner. It's a pattern you see sometimes, not a pattern you absolutely have to follow, and indeed a pattern that you don't need to use or can't use if you are using provided in add injectable, which I would recommend using anyways. But if you do provide your services in providers of your app module, well, then this is a pattern you might want to use. Let's have a look at it. In our app module, if we have a look at the providers, I have the shopping list service and the recipe service there and my intersetter. Now, the idea behind the core module is that we simply provide all these application-wide services that are important right from the start of the application. that we provide them in a separate module, which we then simply import into the app module, really just to keep this leaner and to have a way or a place where we can quickly see all the core services of this application. Now, as I mentioned, this does only make sense, or is only a pattern you may use if you are providing a service like this by adding its type to the provider's array. If you are providing a service like we're doing it for the data storage service, where we pass this object to add injectable, where we set provided in root, then this service is also provided application-wide, and you can't and shouldn't add it to providers of the app module. And this is indeed the approach I would recommend taking. I would not provide services in the app module. I would instead provide them application-wide like this. The effect is the same, but it keeps the app module cleaner and leaner automatically. Still, for some things like the intersetters, you have no alternative. You have to add them to providers. And here, for demo purposes, I also added shopping list service and recipe service. Then we can add a core.module.ts file where we export the core module. And that, again, is just a regular module with ng module like this. An ng module, as before, now needs to be imported. So ng module from @Angular core. Now here in ng module, you add providers, this providers array, and there you simply add the providers you had in your app module, like this. Now, of course, for this to work, you need to make sure you're importing all the things that you use in here. So I can grab these imports from the app module. We're in the end talking about the shopping list service, the recipe service, and the auth intersetter service. I'll cut them from the app module and move them here into the core module. Import path is the same because the core module file is right next to the app module file. And I also need the HTTP intersetters. I can cut them from here and instead use that here, add it here to the core module. Import HTTP intersetters from @Angular, Angular/common/HTTP. So now the core module here is prepared. You don't need to export your services because services work differently than declarations. Only declarations and other modules need to be exported. Services are automatically injected on a root level. You don't need to export them to make this happen. So services are simply an exception. And therefore now in the app module, the only thing we have to do is we have to import our core module, even though it's not exporting anything, but to still include it here into our build process. And we import it from our core.module file. With that set up, the application restarts, and you should still have the same functionality as before. I can fetch my recipes here. Let's try deleting a recipe, which will use the recipe service behind the scenes. Let's test something here for my shopping list. This all still works, so all these services still work, but now we have them in the core module, which is our go-to place to quickly see our root application services. And we have a leaner app module without a providers array. But as I mentioned, A, this is optional, and B, this is only required if you provide a service here instead of providing it through @Injectable, which would be my recommendation to use whenever possible.